today, before we go to backup and implement, right? I'm seeing a lot of challenges with respect to the interviews. Our team is not able to, crack the interview. So I want to take this session and you know, help them to answer a couple of questions, or probably I want to highlight what are the gaps where they're actually lagging. Okay, how we can actually improve on those things and how we can explain them to the technical panel. So the question they are being asked are very simple. Okay, very simple questions. I have seen like people technical panel is asking, and we are not able to answer those questions in respective we do the labs. So that's all because you're not able to uh, you know add that as your experience, or you're not feeling that as your real-time experience, right? Probably you are not able to explain a better way. So we'll try to identify those things and we'll try to answer, so you can take that as an example and prepare well for the interviews. First of all, there are two things. One is the technical part. Okay, the other one is the non-technical, which is the process. Okay, so process tells you, like, what do you do on day-to-day basis. Technical tells you what do you know about the platform, right? Those two things you should be aware. So far we have been discussing technical and you have been doing a lot of implementation. Sometimes we have been discussing the process as well, but you guys are like maybe not able to catch that. Maybe I did not highlight that in our sessions. Okay, we'll talk about both of them. So today we'll take one scenario, one service, which is the Azure VM. So what are the operations you are going to perform on Azure VM? And if you want to implement those operations, what process you are going to follow, and how do you implement, and while implementing, what kind of technical issues you might see, and we'll try to elaborate the technical part of it. Okay, so let's say this is your VM. Okay, so for this virtual machine, I'm taking, this could be your Windows Server 2016 operating system, and it have one OS and let's say two data disks. Okay, and it is running a critical application. Okay, that's a scenario. So what let's first list on what are the operations we are going to perform on the Azure virtual machine. So most of you guys already know. So the virtual machine is running on the Microsoft Azure backend platform. So it's running on a physical hardware. So sometimes you have to perform the maintenance. You have to go through some maintenance. These are a couple of operations. Okay. Okay, and so apart from the fabric, right, so the daily regular operations you might perform on the virtual machine itself. The virtual machine, specifically if I talk about the virtual machine, I should say compute related. Maybe you might perform the resize activities, and you might perform the redeploy operations, redeploy, and reapply. All right, and you might be using serial console. Okay, let's not talk about this one. You might be also doing the restart. Okay, stop, and stop deallocated. Okay, these are the couple of operations. And when it comes to the VM, we have the disk. In the disk, what you generally do is add a disk and increase the disk size. Okay, these are the operations you perform. And detach disk. All right, and take a snapshot of the disk. These are the couple of operations. Then what else you do is with respect to the disk, I think this is pretty much what you do. Then when it comes to the NIC, on the NIC, what you do is IP address updates, IP updates, and then you have the NSGs, and in the NSG create a rule. Okay, and update rule, new rules, or maybe update the existing rule. Update in the sense, add a new port or a IP or kind of thing, or maybe delete a port or a IP address, or just you're going to update those things on the energy side. So what else you perform? We have the compute, we have the storage, we have the network side. On the network side, specific to the virtual machine, I think that is pretty much what you do. Yeah, so you also add VM to ASGs, application security groups, and proximity placement groups. Okay, and when it comes to the NIC, there is another thing called accelerator networking AN, right? So these are the couple of operations what you perform on your virtual machines. Then apart from this, I think these are the daily operations. Okay, and apart from this, let's go with the troubleshooting. So what kind of troubleshooting you do on the virtual machine? Of course, there's one more thing, right? We shouldn't forget these things. This is also come to the VM, right? So configure backup. Okay, you add the VM to the backup, and backup failures. Let's say backup is not working. Okay, we'll talk about the failures later. When it's a backup, add VM to backup. Okay, these are the operations, and trigger manual backup. Okay, then change backup policy for the VM, and what else you perform? You perform the restore operation, restore from backup. These are the couple of operations that you perform on the virtual machine. Then the other one is the DR, so which is the ASR, and add VM to replication. Okay, and update disk to the VM and enable replication for it. Then what else you perform? Change replication properties. These are the couple of tasks you get it, and upgrade mobility service agent. Okay, this is the another update, another task that you get it on the virtual machine. Apart from this, if your application needs test DR to be performed before it goes to the production, then you say mock DR. So you will go through end-to-end DR replication process. That's another thing that you perform, mock DR. So one of the other thing I can say is the monitoring. Okay, in the monitoring, you add VM to monitoring.
Auto scale of, can you perform auto scale of VM, something like that?
No, it's not there. It's not supported for the VM. Okay, so add VM to monitoring, and sometimes you might have to configure alerts or rules for your virtual machine. Okay, monitoring that includes the CPU kind of things. Then you might have to, let's say if you're the L3 or something, you might have to create some dashboards and using the monitoring solution. Okay, so yeah, this is all like configuration part. The another important thing is the patching, right? You will add patching. We add VM to patching, create schedules in the update manager, schedules, and I think, yeah, so that's all. You will add VMs and create a schedules. Another request, you might get, let's say, update tags. You have to update the tags for your virtual machine in case if it is missing. That's about the tags. Updates tags, remove the tags. And what else we have is a create a new tags, right? So kind of examples. So these are the tags related. And when it comes to the policy, you mostly don't do it. But in case if somebody asks you, let's say, associate a policy to a resource, basically this will be applied in a subscription level or a management group level. So nothing to worry about this one. Maybe you might be asked if it's a new environment, create a new policy. Okay, it's very rare scenarios, create a new policy and assign. But people ask you, what kind of policies you created in your environment, can you give some examples, right? So you should be aware of what policies are exist and how do you create them. Okay, so policy is fine. Then this is about everything, policies related to the virtual machine. Okay, we are not talking about the entire Azure services. We are speaking about the services which are related to the virtual machine only. Okay, if you are a Azure admin and if you are working on the Azure operations team or cloud operations team with respect to the Azure VM, so these are the tasks that you get it. Okay, you may get over the email, you may get through a ticketing tool, right? So maybe you don't get anything, but it's your responsibility that you have to add your machines to these resources, right? It's like a checklist that you perform as soon as a VM build. Maybe you need to ensure that your VM is part of all these things. Okay, out of all these things we have covered many of them. Okay, we discussed about backup DR, we have not implemented. We did not implement the monitoring and patching, but apart from that we have covered everything, we discussed everything. So we'll try to talk about each and every component now today and see what it is and when we have to go through it. Okay, so um, and what process we follow. Okay, so we'll start with the VM activities. Okay, compute activities. These things, what process you follow. We discussed this process in the past as well, but I just want to talk about this here. Okay, since we started this one. So let's say okay, so you got a request. Okay, you got a request for the restart of your VM. So everybody knows restart of a VM is a very simple process. You go to Azure portal and you just click on the virtual machine or select the virtual machine, restart it. So before you restart, you need to ask a couple of things. In any enterprise environment, any company, these are the minimum thing that you try to understand before you go for the restart operation, right? So first of all, why we need to restart the server? Okay, this is the question, right? And will there be any impact if I do a restart, right? And what process steps I have to follow before I restart? Okay, so basically when we need to restart means there could be situations the server is in a high performance issues, so it's experiencing performance issues where the CPU might be going 95 or 98 percentage. Then the only option is to go with the restart. Okay, sometimes what happens is, okay, server is not able to RDP. Okay, let me list down those things, right? When you see a performance issues, if somebody asks you, you can take this as an example as well and tell them, okay, whenever we see performance issues and we are not able to log into the server, the only first and foremost thing that we do is the restart. Okay, that's one of the reason why we go for the restart of the virtual machine. The other thing is, you are working on some other issues. Let's say you are working on a backup failure issue, okay, which has nothing to do with the application downtime or production server downtime. It's a backup service. Backup is not working. So you tried something, your team tried something, nothing is working out. So then that's when you might say, okay, Microsoft might also say that you have to restart the virtual machine. Okay, that's one of the example, right? In such scenarios, you might have to go with the restart. So that's where we have to restart, because the restart might update some binaries, restart might fix some other issues, which can actually, it's not thing to related to the application, as I said, some other application depending on the restart. Let's say backup failures maybe needs a restart of the virtual machine. Maybe some patching failures needs a restart of the virtual machine. Maybe some application itself, the application is re-updated, maybe some update have been done, you have to restart the virtual machine, right? There can be various use cases why you need to restart. So let's say I'll take example of performance issue. No, let's say backup failure. So there's a backup failure issue, and Microsoft recommending you to the restart of the server. For them, it's just a restart, because their goal is to fix the backup issues. They do not worry about other issues, like what happened when you restart the machine, right? So it's your responsibility to identify what is the impact. Okay, so is it a production server, or is it a dev server, maybe a test server, right? So, and what application is installed, and who is the owner of the application? Okay, so whom to reach out for approval? Okay, so these are the things that we consider before we understand restart the server. Because though it is a test, how do you identify it as a test? By looking at the server, you may not be able to understand test, right? Test or production or development environment. So you might be relying on the tags. Maybe you have the tag that says, okay, it's a dev server, it's a test server, it's a production server, right? And sometimes you might have some documentation, some document or SOP that says any server starting with certain naming standard that says dev server, that's a test server. You might be relying on them. Then you might say, okay, this is belongs to development environment, right? So, and the document might also say, or maybe the tags might also say, who is the owner and what is the application running. Okay, and the owner can be the approver as well. So what we generally do, we just go back to the then it comes to the process, right? So we once we know what is the impact, sometimes we don't know the impact, so we might have to go ahead and ask the user, maybe the owner, saying, okay, so we have a server and that server backup is not working since couple of days, and Microsoft tried fixing the problem. They are requesting us a restart of the virtual machine. So restart of the virtual machine might bring your application down. So you are gonna informed to the application team or a owner and get approval. So you have to say, before you say restart, right? What is the duration? How long you need a downtime? Okay, so so that they can confirm whether it is possible or not. And what is the criticality? What if you don't reboot the server, right? So you might give a justification. If you don't reboot the server, it might impact the backup solution. You will not have the backup available for this specific server. You will go ahead and provide the justification and get a confirmation. And you will also ask a couple of questions. Before I restart the server, do I need to do any sanity check? Right? Let's say, do I need to stop the services, or do I need to, bring down an application, maybe, take a kind of a backup or local backup kind of things we have to ask, and do I need to involve the application team, during this activity? So they will give you all the things, we need application team to be available during this activity. And sometimes the application might have the monitoring enabled, right? So let's say the URL they are accessing, that might have the monitoring. What are the monitoring solution they are using, that might be having the monitoring. So if the monitorings are not disabled, application, when you're restarting the server, application might be down, and you might get a tickets, high tickets, critical tickets. Maybe somebody will try to reach out to you and saying, hey, there are critical issues happened because you restarted a server. Many things might happen. We have to say, can we disable the monitors? So these things you will try to gather all these requests, and based on the date and time that they have given, you are going to create a change request. In the enterprise, you might already know about it. We are going to create a change request. So there are different tools, BMC Remedy, or different tools available to create a change request. ServiceNow also is available. So what we generally do, we create a change request. Since you are going to implement, you are going to create a change request. Then you need application team, you need a Windows team, if it's a Windows server, right? So then you need a operations team, right? So cloud operations. So you will yourself create a ticket, or maybe you are owning the change request, you don't need to create. So you are going to assign a task to each and every team. Okay, and either it can be a task, it can be a ticket as well. So anything is fine, depends on the company to company, the process they follow. Okay, so we define them, and application team has to provide their steps, what step they are going to perform, and Windows team is going to provide steps, what validation they are going to perform, and cloud operations team, that's you, and you are going to say what are the step-by-step process you're going to follow. So the first thing could be, so application team log into the server, then this perform the validation, application is working fine before they restart the server, they perform all the validation, and they stop the services. If there is a DB that has to be stopped before the application stop, then you have to engage the DB team as well. Though there is no activity from the on the application server from the DB side, but there is a DB server that has to be powered off. I mean, services that has to be powered off during this activity. Then engage the DB team. They will stop the services. They do all the pre-checks. Then Windows team perform the validation as well, like the core service is working fine, the service joined to the domain, all those things. Then that's where your Azure engineer comes into the picture, and he's gonna just do a restart. So during the restart, so the VM will be restarted, and then he will confirm to, once it is online, then he'll confirm to the application team. Then they do this validation. DB team will again do the validation, and Windows team do the validation. So we know it as a 2 minutes work or 5 minutes job to do this operation, but we have to go through this entire process. When you are talking to anybody, keep in mind this process and be confident about this one, right? So though it's a restart operation, and you have to follow that's why you will see people working on Azure for 5 years, 6 years. They only know these operations because they are spending their whole time in following this process. So they get at least, let's say, 5 tickets for a restart. Maybe for 5 tickets, they have to get a change request. They have to reach out to the application team. They have to wait for the approval. And this is nothing to do with the application. This is everything to do with the backup failure alone. Similarly, you will have many issues. If I go back to this, right, you have many services that you're managing it, right? Each service might have some or the other issue, right? And you have to follow this process. That's why, most of us, though we have been working on Azure, maybe though we have been part of the cloud operations, we have been doing this process, and during this process we are good with the process, but we forget the technical part, and we forget to explain in the interviews, right? So that's why we are trying to come into the and understand, or trying to recap everything. Okay, so be it a restart, maybe be it a redeploy. So there is another option, redeploy, right? So redeploy, or maybe stop the virtual machine, right? Stop deallocated virtual machine. Any operation that requires a downtime has to go through this process, even including the resize of the virtual machine, right? So because these requires a downtime, you have to go through this process, right? So, and the steps might vary, depends on the operation. Restart, redeploy, stop, these are like eventually you're restarting the server, maybe powering of the server. You have to go through this process. Maybe stop and stop deallocated doesn't require the validation, because post implementation validation, because we're just powering of them. But restart, redeploy requires the pre and post validations are required. So you will have to involve the each and everybody. Okay, resize also require pre and post activities, but there is another thing that you have to follow here. Okay, the question is why we have to resize it, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so redeploy, what is redeploy, what is stop, and what is stop deallocated? If I talk about them, right, stop means you took RDP to the server. Okay, you took remote desktop connection, and inside the server you are powering off your virtual machine. You are shutting down the virtual machine from the OS level. That will take you into the stop status. On Azure portal you will see the VM status as stop. Okay, so stopped means though the virtual machine operating system is in a
Power off.
shutdown status. Okay, so but still you are being charged for the compute instances, which means Microsoft is still allocated CPU and RAM and other components for your virtual machine. Those resources cannot be utilized for any other customer, any other virtual machine. They're allocating to you. That is the reason they are gonna charge you. So most of the Windows engineer may not be aware that they once they're done with their activities, they just go and power off the server. But as a cloud engineer, we have to identify the list of servers which are in a power off status or stop status. We have to stop deallocate them. When you do a stop deallocated, so the compute resources will be deallocated from the virtual machine. It's going to be just a container, virtual container, and so those compute resources can be allocated to some other customer or released to the backend server. So that's the reason you're not going to charge if it is a stop deallocated. So that is the difference between the stop and stop deallocated. So what is the redeploy? And when do we do this operation? So that this is the physical server, and on top of this there are multiple virtual machines of different customers also can be running, maybe your virtual machines can be running. Let's say this is a node, this is a physical server, and this is your virtual machine, and this is the another virtual machine that you're running. Okay, so you might get a request saying that unable to RDP to the server, maybe application not accessible. Okay, probably slowness on the application. Okay, um, slowness on the application, performance issues on the application. I know this is nothing to do with the physical server and everybody think that way, but sometimes this could be one of the reason why these issues might be occurring. Okay, so what happened when you redeploy is you have multiple physical servers in the data center which are managed by Microsoft. When you do redeploy, this VM will be moved to another healthy node in the backend. Maybe it's not about a healthy node. The VM will be moved to another node. In simple words, maybe I can say this VM will be moved out of the current node and move to another node, and we expect that node will be healthy node. It doesn't mean that this is a faulty node, right? So we try this redeploy option as a last method of troubleshooting any of these problems. Okay, maybe you can try this as a first method, but it may not be necessary because this requires a restart of your virtual machine. During this process, your virtual machine will be restarted and move to another server in the backend. Okay, so even if you do stop and start again, I mean stop deallocated and start again, so there are like 90% of the times the VM will be moved to another node, or maybe it will be starting on the different node in the backend. It's not 100% guarantee that it will be moved to another node. There are 90% of the chances the VM might be moving to another node. The reason could be when you stop deallocate the resources, compute resources or resources are deallocated from the virtual machine. When you start it, at that time, which physical server is ready to give the capacity for the virtual machine, so that node will be chosen and VM will be powering on that node. That's the reason. It's not always, maybe the problematic server, maybe the previous node, if it is the only one available in the rack, right? Maybe your virtual machine also might be running in the same server. So sometimes stop deallocated might move the VM, when you start it might move the VM to another node, but it is not always true. Okay, but redeploy is the option you can try. It's 100% it will move the VM from one node to another node in the backend. Okay, and you might think how it is related to this problem, right? So this could be because the physical server which is running in the backend might be experiencing some performance issues, might be some issues with respect to the operating system, right? Since your virtual machine is running on the this physical server, it may not function as expected, right? Maybe because it is experiencing performance issues, this is not getting enough resources. Though in Azure portal, you might see VM performance is like, let's say, less than 30% utilization, maybe 50% utilization on memory or whatever it is. But basic functionalities to run this virtual machine as a fabric level. So this physical server is not giving enough resources, right? That could be the reason your virtual machine may not be connecting. It may not, the application running on the virtual machine may not be functioning well. Maybe because of that, this is slowness might be addressed. Because of that, performance issues might be seen. So how do you identify such problems, right? So Microsoft generally tells you in case if there is a node failures, in case if there is a physical server that is experiencing the high performance issues, you will get a notification under the resource health of your virtual machine saying that your virtual machine is redeployed to another machine because another server, because the current physical server having some problem. Okay, it's a faulty node. So that will be there after you after they redeploy it. Okay, so sometimes they may not send us a notification. Maybe they might not have noticed this. Maybe it cannot be a performance issue, some other issue at a OS level, right? So before they identify and they take the steps to move the VM to another node, your application is not functioning well. Maybe it will say that it's maybe the user saying it's like sluggish. Maybe they're not able to access the application. They might see some performance issues. They will raise a critical incident. Maybe it can be some downtime.
Yeah,
So
today I got this question, Kamlaka.
mhm,
He said like, I have taken the RDP. It is I'm getting blank screen. How do you fix like that?
yeah. So basically, what we do in such scenarios, you can try many options, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. What are the step-by-step process we follow if you see such problems? Okay. So, but you try all the options. Let's say you check the performance metrics and you see everything is good. You check the application, log into the server and check everything is good, right? And you check the application service, everything is good, but still you are seeing the problem, right? Nothing is identified at a OS level and nothing is identified at Azure VM level. Then go ahead and do the redeploy. So I've seen in my experience, 90% of the times these problems are fixed because there is no network connectivity issue, there is no performance issue, RDP service working, application service are working, you didn't see a performance issues at a OS level, everything is good, but still some component is not working. Maybe the NIC attached to the virtual physical server might be having some problem, some issue at OS level. Do the redeploy and go ahead and redeploy it. It should work 90% of the time. Again, before you redeploy, ensure that you follow this process. You have to follow this process.
Today I have seen some other options, Kamlaka.
Mhm.
For the RDP issue, sometimes when he has given, we need to reset local administrator
We'll talk
password.
about them. I'll talk about
Okay.
them. Yeah, I will talk about them. So I have seen like most of the people are like, misguiding. Resetting the password, it's not a solution. It's not a best action to perform. Why do you have to reset the password when it is not giving you that, invalid credentials? If it is giving you invalid credential, then go ahead and reset the password, right? So we'll talk about them. What are the step-by-step process we have to follow from the Azure side in case if you're not able to RDP to the server. Then we will also talk about the no boot issues and how do you fix the no boot issues. Maybe we may not be able to provide a solution, but we'll come across the process that we follow. We'll try to discuss about the process that we follow. Okay, so this is about the redeploy, and there is another option which is the reapply. So redeploy, you know that there is a downtime required. There is something called reapply as well. Reapply is a solution where you think there's an issue at a Microsoft and VM status is not healthy or provisioning status is not successful, then go for the reapply option. You will see on the VM when you go to the virtual machine, you might see the VM provisioning status is not correct. Maybe the provisioning status is failed. Such kind of errors you might see in the banner. you just try this reapply option. And maybe sometimes before you do redeploy option for all these things, go for the reapply as well. Sometimes they might fix the problem as well. It's all issues at the back end. You have not done anything wrong. It's an issue from the Microsoft platform, maybe some fabric, some issue, some component is not updated. So go ahead and do a reapply. So reapply doesn't require any reboot, and it is not going to impact any one of your components from the OS level or application side as well. Go ahead and do the reapply, then go for the redeploy as a last option. Okay, so these are the operations that requires a downtime, and reapply doesn't require it. And then what process you have to follow. And reapply doesn't require any process. You don't need to create a change request, no need to inform anybody, but you just need to ensure that if this requires some validations after that, you just coordinate with your application team. So these are the operations we perform. And the another operation, if I talk about the resize, right? Okay, resize operation. So the same process we follow. Why you have to go for the restart? Because any application server or any web server, database server, right? When we are provisioning, we are going to specify the certain VM size. Let's say 4 vCPUs and 8 GB of RAM. Example I'm taking, right? And 8 GB of RAM. So this and maybe this also needs one OS disk with the 127 GB and data disk one with the 1 TB and data disk 2 uh, with the, let's say, 1.5 TB TB, right? So we have a VM disk size and disk tires already specified. At the time of provisioning itself, every application that will have its own VM SKU standards. So we think that this should be sufficient. But when somebody is reaching out to you for the resize of the virtual machine, that's a question, right? So why is it like not provisioned as expected? Maybe it is provisioned with a lower size, right? So we need to check. If it is provisioned correctly, then why are they asking for the VM increase? Is it an issue with the disk side? Is it an issue with the compute aspects? Maybe is the analysis not correct? Maybe they're seeing some performance issues. Could be a redeploy fix the problems. So what metrics you have to say that I have to go for the resize? Before you implement anything, ask for the justifications, right? Why we have to go for the resize. So application team might say, okay, we are experiencing the slowness on the application. Okay, when you say slowness on the application, when is the slowness? Is it like one time you have noticed or repeating? Okay, if it is repeating, is there any specific time frame, right? Is there any specific time frame that you're seeing? And what is the user experience when you see the slowness? What is the user experience or application experience? Why do you think there is a slowness? What metrics you have it, right? So based on this, you're going to take a decision whether you have to increase or decrease. Sometimes maybe there can be some optimization that can be done at application side. Maybe at a OS level we did not create a paging properly. Paging is not configured properly, so we might have to go with the OS team and say, hey, this application, this server is not configured the proper paging, memory management is not happening properly. So that could be one of the reason why we are seeing the application issues, performance issues. Maybe there are some zombie process that is working in not that is actually consuming more resources. Can we kill this process? Maybe they might have done, whenever application team reaching out to you 90% of the time, they might have done their application analysis from the application point of view, and they might come to you for the resize. But it's always good to validate the metrics what they shared with you. Okay, and if you think that is a valid, maybe let's say application is consuming 90%, maybe they need to go for the resize, right? So when we do the initial analysis, when we initially provision, we work with the application team and they do their performance testing, load testing, and a lot of things. Based on that, we define this VM size. Now it is consuming more. Let's say earlier it was consuming 70% or 75%, 80%. Now it is going 90%. So what could be the reason? Is it like, application, some packages has to be upgraded? Maybe they upgraded and they're giving some trouble. Maybe there is some version of the Java or any other component that needs some tuning. So we have to just debate with them to understand what could be the reason, right? Maybe because you might be following this approach and might have deployed many customers, and only specific application server is having problem, means there is some issue with the application side, right? You also have to think about any other applications causing this problem, any other application servers which have the similar application having the problem, right? So we need to understand what is the difference between them, right? Maybe the latest patches on the server might be causing, maybe application, they made some changes, maybe that could be the problem, right? These all questions we might have to ask to understand what is the reason for upgrade. Maybe you have to work with your Windows team, to run the performance, perf monitor, go with the performance metrics collection, and review which process is consuming more resources, which application is consuming more resources. Is it a OS component, is it application component, maybe some other component. So based on that, we have to tune this. And if they've already done, if the application team already had a connectivity with them and collaboration with the OS team, and they have come up with the set of analysis, and the only solution is to upgrade, then we might have to go for the upgrade. Okay, the
Here,
otherwise we cannot go for the
Samarth,
upgrade. Yeah,
even again, Windows team will be there, different apart from cloud
definitely,
team.
definitely OS team has
I
to be
thought
there.
that Azure Cloud Administrator will handle
No, no,
VMs
nothing.
also.
In any enterprise, you will have a separate team. Maybe, nowadays what's happening is one team does everything. Okay. Within the cloud operations team, you have the Windows expert, you have the Azure expert. They just need to collaborate. Sometimes the Azure guy has to learn the Windows components as well, right? It's
Yes,
all the
yes.
company to company, but what I've seen, majority of the organization, they don't deal with everything. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, because as Azure, as an Azure guy, you handle many things, not only the VM performance, right? You have many other services that you're going to manage it. You cannot just stick to, performance issues. You have the network, you have the storage, backup, logic apps, monitoring, so many things that you manage it, right?
Again, for storage accounts, storage team will be there, or do we need to
No,
handle
no,
again different?
whatever is Azure native services. VM is
Mm.
Azure native service, storage is Azure native service, VNet is Azure native service. You handle it. So within a VM, let's say fabric related, I just mentioned, right? Redeploy, reapply, when to take the decision, right? They will be on under your control. Something to do with the OS level, okay, let OS team has to handle, because they are the expert on the OS side. They will take the right decision. It is like a structured way, right? We cannot just mix up everything. So they can be one team with the Windows, Linux, and Azure team, to avoid any delays in terms of the collaboration. We can go with that, but their roles they have to handle, and Azure roles Azure engineer has to handle. That's what I recommend. uh, you know because otherwise you have to have big team with a multi-skill, multi-platform, right? You have a network engineer who handle the Azure and the network component as well. So it's always important to separate them, but have one team, have a standard process for everybody to avoid the delays in the collaboration. Okay, probably yes. It's all depends on the company, I would say. Some companies might say multi-skill. Some companies say let's separate the skill. It all depends, and it's pretty easy to do this performance analysis. We just there are a couple of tools, we just install them, and that gives us the analysis. You have the monitoring tools, you just go for the monitoring team, and maybe you have the Azure monitoring solution. Go to Azure Monitor, maybe Azure VM, get the metrics from the last 90 days or 30 days, analyze what is the what time the CPU is going high, memory is going high. So those monitoring tools, what they do is they give you the CPU memory utilization at a high level, but that doesn't give you which process is consuming more resources, right? That's when we have to go into the server and do the testing and we have the performance monitor tool, we have the various other tools available, internal system internal tools. We use them, ps exec and other tools to identify which process is consuming, and we'll take a decision based on it. It's a deep analysis, it's need a collaboration with the different team. So we are not limited, right? So it's again depends on the company to company, Mahendra. So sometimes you have to handle, sometimes you have to collaborate with them. Okay, so that's about the performance, what actions we perform, and how we collaborate, right? And if you think there's a problem with only one server, then you need to, it's a question to you and go deep analysis. And if it is a multiple servers and every for that application, and every application has to be resized, then that you convert as a project. Let's say there are like 50 to 60 servers, you have to upgrade or resize because it's a change that you identified. The SKU what you have given in the time of deployment is not sufficient. All other customers might also see impact. So then you have to create as a project, you have to engage a PM, and the PM maybe you can drive it as well, depends on the company. So you have to coordinate with the application team, find out the downtime, and get approvals for the VM resize because it involve additional capacity and additional cost as well. Get approvals and talk to them and get a downtime, and work collaborate with the application DB and monitoring team if needed, Windows team. And if you are a Windows guy as well, Azure and Windows guy, you have the right permissions, then you can go ahead and implement this as a project, do the operation for everything, this task execution. Okay, maybe you always have to coordinate with the your team members, you will involve multiple people, and they do this as a project. Okay, so this is about the resize activities. So same thing with the disk as well. If I go back to the other one, I think we spoke about this one, right? So if I said disk activities, you get a ticket. They will say, okay, added disk to the virtual machine. Then again, the same question comes, at the time of application deployment, we decided these two disks should be fine, right? Additional data disk should be fine. And why do you need an additional disk now? So the question comes again, they say we have a space issues and we need an additional disk. Then you need to ask, okay, which application is consuming more space? Is there a way to reduce the space? And is it like, it's a temporary unit or permanent unit? Same thing with the resize, right? Sometimes they'll say, okay, we are doing some testing, we need a application server to be resized to high. Then you have to ask, is it temporary or permanent? This question has to be asked. If they say temporary, then you get a temporary approvals and go ahead and resize, or maybe add additional disk if it is a disk, right? And sometimes they say, can you expand the existing disk itself from Azure layer? Whether you are adding a disk or expanding existing one, that doesn't matter, right? So expanding disk might needs a downtime, but adding a disk doesn't require a downtime. So you can go ahead and add a disk in case if it is a temporary. In case if they say no, we need additional disk for this application to work fine, then you have to ask the question, why do you need, and what is the difference, what you're seeing. Then if it is standard process, go ahead and inform the build or automation team whenever you're deploying a new application servers with this configuration, and go ahead and add additional disk with this capacity. You get approvals and you go ahead and implement the disk as well. Same thing with the disk addition and disk increase. But there's something called detach. So detach also, it's a good, which means that they are done with some testing that doesn't require this disk. So you just go ahead and detach the disk, and detached disk, you can ask them like, is it like, should I just remove it and keep it for some time, or should I completely delete this disk? So when you detach from the disk, the disk will be removed from the VM, but it will be available under the disk section, and you will be still being charged for the disk. So that is called zombie disk, not attached to disk. You will be charged for it. It's better to confirm, do you need disk, or this disk, or can we go ahead and delete this disk as well? So those kind of things you have to ask, and you will be asked at the time of this detached disk operations. The other one is a snapshot of the disk. What is a snapshot of the disk? When do you take the snapshot, right? So basically the snapshot of the disk is taken while performing certain operations. Okay, so let me just take another example. So let's say snapshot, right? So you are performing some application upgrade. Okay, and this server doesn't have the backup. Maybe if you trigger the backup, it might take some more time. Maybe the application upgrade is going to happen only on the OS disk. Then you just take the one disk snapshot and keep it with you. Probably it's a very critical server, and you are going to reboot the server. It's a very critical application that is running on this server, and if you think reboot might cause some other problem and application might be down and you cannot afford more downtime situation, then go for the disk snapshot, so that in case if something happened post reboot, you can just create a new disk out of this snapshot and attach or swap with the existing server. These are the couple of use cases why you go for this snapshot. Maybe you don't want to take the backup, there's a change that is going to be performed, and so that you just take the snapshot and keep it for a few days, and if that change working fine, they just ask you to delete the snapshot, and you can just otherwise if the change is not working fine, you will be able to create a new disk and swap with the problematic server, right? So that's one of the reason why we go with this snapshot. So you can ignore this option if you have the backup solution. The only difference is the VM has, let's say, 10 data disk, one OS disk, right? When you trigger the backup, the 10 disk will be backed up. But when you go for the snapshot, you think there's only one disk that you have to take a snapshot. You have an option to take the snapshot of the disk. So instead of taking 10 disk backup, you take only one. That's when you go with the snapshot. But otherwise, you can always go for the backup solution. Okay, so if you think that entire VM might be crashed, with the activity that you're going to perform, then go for the backup. In case if you don't have the backup solution, then go for the snapshot. But majority of the production environment, you will have the backup solution. Either it is a Commvault or maybe Azure native solutions. You use any one of them and take the backup before you perform the any activities. Okay, so this is about the disk and snapshots, and talking about the network interface card. So very rare scenarios you get a request to attach additional link, but it's not required. This only, I have seen the additional NICs are associated only for firewall appliances. You will see 3 NICs, right? But in case if your server needs multiple communication, one communication, let's say application to database, and there's one NIC that needs to talk to some other application, let's say it's like it need to talk to some other application server, that might, then such scenarios you might go with the NIC, but otherwise it's not required to attach multiple NICs. But for the existing NIC, you can enable you might get request to enable accelerated networking, maybe disable accelerated networking, because sometimes some of the issues that Microsoft might not support the VM with the accelerated networking. You have to disable it or enable it. So it's very rare scenarios you get operations on the NIC. And another request you might get, let's say, I want to configure a static IP for my virtual machine. Could be it's a critical application server, could be a domain controller. Maybe you have to assign the static IP. That's when you go with the NIC operations. But otherwise, pretty much same. You don't do anything here on the NIC level. So whatever we do, it's on the subnet level. So you might have to check the effective routes, or effective rules that are applying in the NIC level, but it's not a cloud day-to-day operations, I would say. Okay, so yeah, so talking about the VMs to ASG and proximity placement group, what does the ASG? It's an application security group. Okay, so this is used to reduce the number of rules in the network security group rules, right? So you have the one you have the application stack. Okay, this is the application stack, and you have the database stack. Okay, you have 10 application servers here. Okay, and you have the 10 database servers. Example I'm taking, right? All these application servers need to talk to the database server, and database server need to talk to the application server. In this case, if you have NSGs, in you have to create a NSG rule. Okay, and the rule have to be specified, the source and target, and sometimes you might see multiple rules are being created. Maybe let's say application 1 need to talk to DB1 only, it has to talk to DB3 or DB5. So you might have to create a rules, and sometimes eventually it might give you conflict, it might give you a confusion. That's the reason what we do, we create a one ASG, one application security group. Let's say app to DB, application to DB, one ASG you create. And what you need to do is add all your application to this ASG. Okay, then you create one more ASG. Let's say this application ASG, this DB ASG. Add all your DB server to this ASG. Okay, one ASG for the application, one ASG for the database. Then if you want to allow the communication, just allow the communication between app ASG to the DB ASG. So in future, if you create another application server, add the application server to this application ASG, so that automatically that server get a connectivity to the DB server. Okay, similarly you have to do the same thing. If there is a new database server created, you just allocate or assign this DB server to this DB ASG. Automatically the DB can be talked to this application server. So this will reduce the number of rules, and it's easy for you to analyze if there is a connectivity issue between the application and DB server. Okay, that's a ASG, and sometimes you get a request to create a new ASG and update the ASG VM, add VMs to ASG. Okay, so these again, right, adding the VMs to ASGs are automated at the time of build phase. In case if somebody is not configured, you have to ensure that it is taken care. Okay, so then another thing is the proximity placement group. So basically you have the application server, okay, application stack, and you have the database stack as well, right? So the application need to talk to the database, and database have to respond to the application server. So if you keep the VMs in these application DB stack in the same proximity placement group, the delay or latency between these servers are very less. So that's the reason we create a PPG or proximity placement group and add the machines to the same proximity placement group. So you should not add all the servers. You should know what application servers you have to add, what DB servers you have to add. So then it will be easy. Otherwise, let's say you create all application servers in one proximity placement group and all DB servers in separate proximity placement group. That doesn't help you. If you want the delay to be reduced between the app and DB, keep them in the same proximity placement group. Okay, so that's about the proximity placement group, and we will add the VMs to the proximity placement group. You might add the availability set to the proximity placement group as well. Okay, and one thing I want to let you know, guys, when you are restarting the virtual machine, if the VMs, let's say there are 10 VMs, sorry, resize, not the restart. When you are resizing the virtual machine on Azure, and these virtual machines are in a availability set, okay, let's say there are like 6 VMs or 4 VMs in availability set, you have to resize the 6 machines. You cannot resize one machine in a one size, another machine in another size. You might see some problems. So ensure that you remember this point when you're going with the resize operation. Okay, so this is about the NIC and ASGs and proximity placement group. The another important one is the network security group. So this is where you might spend so much of time in day to day, because resize, restarts are very rare use cases, rare tasks you get it, and disk also very rare task you get it. But energy is something that you you might get on a day-to-day basis if you have multiple applications running, right? So what kind of operations you get in the energy? Okay, you might already have a set of energy rules created, um, energy rules, and it's all depends on the application stack. Maybe you have the application one, so that needs one energy. Maybe you create a one energy by environment, let's say dev one energy, test one energy, or maybe production one energy. So you create energies, and you the energy will have the rules, the default rules. Allow communication from app to database, maybe allow communication from application to some web servers, maybe allow communication to application to some other, let's say, um, any internal servers. I'm just giving an example, right? Set of rules already created, and as the application, as per the application architecture, you are initially gonna define these rules, and based on the rules, either you create a VM servers images manually, or maybe it is automated through pipelines, right? You define everything, but sometimes your application team might come to you and say, can you allow the communication between the app 1 to app 2? Maybe they might say dev environment to the test environment. Maybe they will say that we are not able to access the application to the DB server, right? So in such scenarios, you can use the native services, Azure native service, the network watcher. um, in the network watcher, you have a feature called IP verify flow. Okay, this is a good feature that we use in most of the times. This basically asks you to provide the source IP and destination IP. Okay, and what is the port number and protocol. Okay, so when you provide them, it will tell you, it will do a ping test. It will tell you which rule is blocking the communication or which rule is allowing the communication. If you think that communication is already allowed, you can tell them, okay, the communication is already allowed, nothing to do from the Azure layer, it's already allowed. Maybe there is another layer which is a firewall. The firewall might be blocking, but you need to think, where are this application and DB servers exist? Are they in the same network? If it is in the same VNet, so most likely, they will be in the same subnet, unless you have the routing or routes associated in NIC level, but or a subnet level, the communication is between these subnets are allowed. Okay, you need to see that as well. You go to the NIC of a web server and check the effective routes. Maybe go to the subnet routing table of both the DB and application subnets and check what is it is configured, right? If you think that is perfectly fine, then you can say everything is good from the application side. Okay, so if you think there's a communication is blocked, let's say app 1 to app 2 is communication is blocked, then this could be by design. For this application, you cannot allow the communication between the application 1 to application 2 because they are different applications. There could be reason why we disabled it, right? So if it is expected to be allowed, then go ahead and create a change request. If it is a production, if it is a test and development environment, you may not need it, because if it is a production, you are making a change in the production environment. Maybe while doing this change, you might make a mistake. Maybe some changes happening. It's important to track them. That's why we create a change. But if you think this is not recommended to allowed, then that's when you go and do your analysis. Talk to the application team and ask for the justification why you need it. Is it temporary access? Is it a permanent access request? So why do you need this access? You have to ask these questions to them, so that you will understand. If it is a temporary access, even temporary permit, you have to go to SecOps team and tell them that there's a requirement we are going to allow. So because it's not the default process, right? It's not the standard process. You're deviating the process, then it has to go through various approvals. Maybe you have a solution architects, you have the security architects, security engineers, or maybe security team. check with them, and they will be able to confirm. Post approvals, you're going to allow this. And dev to test also, it's not recommended, because sometimes dev might be exposed to the internet, and if you allow the communication, maybe test usually same as production. From test to production, you might already have a communication, so it might give a lead to some other problems. We always go for the secops reviews and approval. So if it's a temporary appointment, we have to ask, and they will be able to provide. So that's a NSG rules process that you follow in the enterprise environment. So going for the other ones, let's talk about this is completed. This part is completed, right? Let's talk about the tags, right? So updating the tags, removing the tags, and creating the tags. It's very rare scenarios to get the tags, and you know the importance of the tags. So the tags are used to categorize the resources based on the environment, based on the customer, right? Maybe based on the application, based on the owner. Probably the most important thing is based on the cost center, right? And this is not only to categorize, it will be useful in many scenarios. If you want to apply the certain solution, let's say patching for a specific set of customers, specific set of environment, you create a maintenance based on the scale pass tags. Probably you want to apply some policies based on the environment, based on the customer, Azure policies, you can use this. And you want to apply, you want to fetch some inventory of the resources to perform some kind of further automation, you might use this tagging solutions. So sometimes there is a new customer onboarded, you might have to add a new tag. You just couldn't get a new tag. Maybe the tag value for a specific resource is not updated properly. Maybe in a specific resource group, all the resources customer name tag is wrongly updated by automation. Maybe somebody manually updated wrongly. So you are going to fix them, right, by updating. Maybe there are few tags which doesn't require, you're going to remove those tags as well. So those are the operations you perform on the tagging, and it's very rare scenario to get this kind of request. Okay, so the tagging also completed, and policies you might be creating, and these are again, as I said, policies already predefined. And very rare scenarios you get a request to create a new policy, but sometimes you might have to work on remediating some policies. Maybe when you're configuring backup, when you're updating some disk configuration, you might see the configurations are failed because there is a policy that is blocking this kind of operation. You need to have some knowledge on how to exclude those policies from the resource group, or those kind of things. You should be aware of it, and you should know what are the built-in policies, what are the custom policies, general policies, right? We should be aware. The built-in policies could be inherit the tags from the resource group, and allow a specific VM SKU sizes, right? Those are like built-in policies that you see. And there are some custom policies as well. Let's say as soon as the VM is created, it should have the backup enabled. As soon as the VM is created, it should have the patching enabled. So as soon as the VM is created, it should have the board diagnostics enabled. So those are kind of policies. Maybe you might have to customize them based on your requirement. Those are custom policies. Very rare scenarios you get this custom policy requirements. You can just follow them to you should know how to create them, and how to assign policies to a resource group or a subscription or a management group level. Okay, then other options, if I say patching, so some customers might be using third-party patching solutions like Blade Logic or a Big Fix kind of a solution. There could be Update Manager as a patching solution. There are like different tools that they use it. But when it comes to the Azure, we have Azure Native Service, which is the Azure Update Manager. So we mostly use the Azure Update Manager. So you need to know how to add the machines to this patching. So there could be some built-in settings where the VMs which are created and connected to workspace will automatically add to the patching. Maybe you have to create a few schedules based on the customer needs and associate your VMs to the patching. So sometimes you might have to remove the VMs from the patching, right? Sometimes you troubleshooting we talked later, right? So these are the day-to-day tasks you get it if you are working in Azure as admin. So adding servers to the patching. Then coming to the monitoring, So add VMs to the monitoring. This mostly automated at the time of VM build. You add the VM to the log analytics workspace, and that install the agent, and it will automatically add part of the monitoring solution. And sometimes you have to configure the alerts. Even alerts also automatically already configured. In case if it is not configured, you might be part of. It's like one-time activities, right? You're gonna define these alerts and rules. So based on that alerts and rules, you might get a tickets, you might get emails. This might be already automated. In case if it is not automated, you have to create them. Maybe you have to add machines to a specific alerts categories. And sometimes you might have to create a dashboard, and nowadays there are plenty of dashboards already available in GitHub. And maybe Microsoft also is giving the workbooks templates already in the monetary section. So it doesn't require so much of skill to implement it, but you should be aware of how to develop them if needed, or how to utilize them. That's about the dashboards. And another important thing is a backup and DR. So as soon as the VMs are created, so most of the times, if it is it's automated, the VM is part of the backup. So if it is not part of the backup, you have to add the VM to the backup and write backup policy. You might have the different policy for the production, development, test, or non-prod environment. So choose the right policy and assign the VM to the backup, and trigger the manual backups. As I said, when I was talking about the snapshot, you might get a request to trigger the backup because application team might be performing some upgrade or some changes you or some other team members are making on the OS level. So you might have to trigger the manual backup. So those kind of requests, sometimes the VM is wrongly chosen the wrong policy. You might have to change the backup policy, and you get a request where, let's say, VM is not accessible. Can I go ahead and reboot, restore from the backup? Such kind of request you get it. Um, on a day-to-day basis. It's not about the issues. We are not talking about the issues. We are talking about the day-to-day activities. And talking about the DR, so you want to add the mission to the replication to provide the DR as a solution. Then this is again automated by most of the organizations. So you add VM to the replication, and you sometimes added a new disk to the virtual machine, the source that has to be enabled with the replication. So sometimes you have to change the replication properties. Let's say change the target VM name, change the target VM SKU, maybe change the target subnet. So those kind of things. And so we have the mobility service agent that gets installed on each and every source machine. Sometimes we disable the auto upgrade, so you have to plan the upgrade of this mobility service agent maybe once in a month, every quarter, maybe every 2 months. You plan this upgrade. And the most important thing is the test DRs. So before you um, go to the live, any application go live, so you do the mock DR, test DR. So you kind of conduct a real DR kind of scenarios and show the confidence to customer, saying, okay, in case if real DR happens, we are ready with the DR solutions. So that's about the DR. So these are the couple of operations that you perform if you are a Azure administrator. On day-to-day basis, you get one or the other request to perform. These are like couple of them. There are many other services. Whatever I mentioned is specific to the VM only. You have the storage, you have the app services, you have the SQL database, you have many other services that you will be dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and you are responsible for supporting them. Okay, so because of these things, though you are working on like 4 to 5 years, you know the process, but you might fail in explaining the technical part. So you just add the VM to the backup, you add the VM to monitoring, just do the day-to-day operations. You are busy with them and you fail to explain, in case if somebody asks you, right? So unless you're part of a core troubleshooting and you're fixing many problems, right, you may forget the core intention. Maybe you may not be able to explain. So that's a reason. So we are just coming up with this kind of sessions which can help